Hi, this is Real World Audio and I'm showing you something really special today. This is a follow-up on the PS Audio DAC story, and this is the power transformer of that DAC, and I'm going to take a little bit on it to finish it up because I do not have time to work on it. So I thought that until that time, until next week, this transformer has plenty of waiting time, so I will just do a cryogenic treatment on this transformer. So let the code do its job until I'm ready to work on the amp and then put it together. So what am I using for the cryogenic treatment, and what is cryogenic treatment? So cryogenic treatment is basically bringing the temperature low. So we are doing a low temperature annealing process on the metals, and that's like tempering the sword, tempering car parts, airplane parts. This is not something voodoo. This is something that has been proven well in time, that the mechanical and electrical properties of metals increase quite a bit when you are doing a cold annealing, because when you look at it, there's the hot annealing that is done on the metal. So each time a metal is drawn, then it is first of all, to produce a metal you need high enough temperature to melt the metal, and then it's formed into a shape, and that's the shape that you get. So when you have these transformer wires, they were created by initially heating them so that the copper is molten, and then a wire was drawn from that molten metal, and then later on it was annealed again. If it was, maybe it wasn't. If it's a higher quality, then it was probably re-annealed, which is that it was heated again and then drawn to the to that correct gauge, that correct thickness. That's the final thickness of that wire, and then it was allowed to cool to room temperature at a certain rate. And the slower the cooling rate, the better the annealing. So it means that the metal crystals, the crystalline structure of the metal can form much better. And there's like different casting techniques for copper, like the Ono casting or OCC casting, and all of these are special forms of annealing with specific rates of temperature dropping back to room temperature, and as a result the crystal structure of the copper is much more uniform and has much better high frequency properties. However, that's something that you cannot influence on your own. So once you have a wire, that's it, that's the wire you have. Eventually, if you have an oven or a temperature control oven at home, then you can heat up your wire and let it cool down at a slow rate. So then you can improve the annealing of your metal, of your wires that way. But to give the metal the extra boost, you need to bring the temperature down to below freezing point. And how much below? Basically, cryogenic treatment means deep cooling, and I've been experimenting with this a lot personally, both with minus 80 degrees Celsius and both with liquid nitrogen, and compared the two of them. How do they compare? So basically, most people who do cryogenic treatment, if you see that wire or transistor or resistor or tube was cryogenically treated, most of the time they mean it was treated in liquid nitrogen. So basically they toss it in liquid nitrogen and next day they take it out, and that's your treatment. However, it's much more elaborate than that. If you do that, especially with vacuum tubes, capacitors, you will have a quite high failure rate. So a lot of the stuff you toss in the liquid nitrogen will break, for the simple reason that the rate of the temperature change. So here's room temperature and then it starts cooling down. And if you just toss something in liquid nitrogen, then the cooling rate is extremely sharp. And especially if it's not just a piece of wire, but let's say a vacuum tube or a capacitor, it will probably be damaged from that extreme rate of cooling. So that's why, if one critical aspect of cryogenic treatment is the cooling rate, you want the drop in the temperature controlled, and then afterwards, when you reach that low temperature, then you want the heating when it goes back from that minus 80 degrees or minus 100 and whatever degrees that you are treating yet. You want to ramp it up back to room temperature as slowly as you can. And ramping back the temperature, you have the problem of condensation, because here in the air we have quite a bit of moisture, and when you cool something down to minus 80 degrees Celsius, then all of that moisture will condensate and will be sitting on your unit, on your wire, inside the unit. All that condensation will build up there from the air, and when you heat it up or when you bring it up to room temperature, it will be wet and soggy and moist on the inside. So that's why it's important, whatever you treat cryogenically, first of all insulate it and make sure that it doesn't get that the airspace is limited. So I will put it in a Ziploc bag and squeeze out the air as much as possible, so there's only a very little amount of air from which the moisture can condensate on the unit. And then when I did that, I will pack it into a secondary container. At the bottom I give some extra cushioning, because as it sits on the shelf, the cold metal shelf will transmit that cold to the box quite fast, and I want the rate of heat transmission be as low as possible. And then I will just close it. So that's it. And then I will put the box inside the minus 80 freezer. You can read minus 85 degrees Celsius. That's the temperature that this iron will sit in, and usually I leave them in, well, if I can, sometimes for a month, but a couple of days of treatment does the trick. And it doesn't matter whether you have a week at minus 85 degrees temperature, or you have overnight at liquid nitrogen, the result is exactly the same. And I have to tell you guys that the effects of cryogenic treatment are not permanent. Whatever benefits you get will last you about 1 year. And then after 1 year, you need to repeat the cryogenic treatment to have continued benefits. And this is not just something humbug. If you have friends who work on airplanes, then they can tell you that, for example, here at the Honolulu airport, for airplane maintenance, they pull the axles of the airplanes every year and cryogenically treat them. And that's because the axles are those metallic parts that have the highest strain on them. So whenever an airplane lands, then on the axle that holds your wheels on the plane, there's just tremendous pressure on it. And you don't want the axle to break when the plane hits ground. And the way to do that is to cryo the axles every year. And that's what they do for sports cars. And so if you have a race car, a lot of the racing car teams, they cryo the pistons, they cryo the moving parts in your car, cryo the brake pads. So these are the pistons, brake pads. These are some of the most critical elements that are exposed to extreme mechanical stress. And when wire conducts high currents, that is just as stressful for that metal as a mechanical stress. And basically when you cryogenically treat a metal, then you improve the restructuralization of the domains inside the metal to form longer domains which are stronger, which are capable of conducting higher current with lower heat loss. And also because of the cryogenic treatment, the metal shrinks as the temperature drops, and that forces out oxygen molecules that are trapped within the domains of the metal. So basically, even though the effects of the treatment will go away after a year, but during that year, your metal will oxidize at a much slower rate because you do not have those oxygen atoms trapped in the lattice of the metallic structure. And that's why the effects last only for a year, because after a year there will be again plenty of oxygen atoms diffusing from the atmosphere, from the air, into the inside of the metal wire. And then you need again that cooling down to that extremely low temperature so that the metal squeezes enough to squeeze out the oxygen from inside the structure. So I hope that just helped everyone to visualize what cryogenic treatment does to the metals, why we do it. Actually, I have done it also when I rebuilt my Volvo. I did it to the pistons, and it's amazing what it can do. It's just yep. So if you are into car racing or building your cars or doing stuff, then if you have a friend who has a lab, works at a lab, and can cryo for you pistons or brake pads, that will make a significant noticeable difference. By the way, you hear that loud noise, that loud hum. The -80 freezer just kicked in. So that's the freezer humming. That's how loud it is, because it needs to keep that super cold temperature inside. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends. Bye bye.